This is Changeling the podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the podcast. Come for the glamour, stay for the vibes. I'm your host Josh, and with us is your other host Puka. Say hi, Puka.
Many greetings.
What are we talking about tonight, Puka?
We are, I am very sorry to say, going into the last of the second edition original line Changeling books, which is Kithbook Eshu.
Certainly the last standalone book.
Yeah, it's a sad moment, but I guess we can look to the future and C20 and whatnot. So,
Yep. So this is by Peter Woodsworth. The copyright says 2001 this time, unlike the old copyrights on the other ones. It's also printed in Canada. That's what it says.
hey,
On mine.
like an issue, it traveled across the border.
Yep.
This is absolutely my favorite of the Deterlazy covers. Maybe tied with the Puka one, but I just love the cover art for this.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the last official art we got for 17 years. So,
Yep.
15 years.
Or maybe 14 years.
14 years. The last official art we got for a number of years.
Yep. So I guess we'll jump right in.
Yes.
So it starts with the intro fiction, which is more of this. Actually, this doesn't look. It's supposed to be like faux calligraphy rather than faux handwriting. It's a lot more readable.
Yeah.
On like burned paper.
The fonts in this book, really.
Yeah.
The kerning on this header.
I mean, I've seen worse from these books, but that's not.
Yeah.
So this is a tale within a tale of the Elegbara or the Eshu telling. I was confused by the naming here. There's like one of each kith plus what you would call an Eshu before this book, but all the other ones were like troll, slua, satyr, just like as if they were their names, and then the Elegbara, which is sort of a word for themselves because Eshu is their, as they get into later, their progenitor, not their kith.
Yeah. Which I assume was kind of derived from some of the scuttlebutt that had been floating around even by this point about, you know, the representation of other cultures and appropriation of indigenous religion and all of that. And I don't know that using Elegbara makes it better. But...
Well, I don't think it's about appropriation so much as just the wrong word.
That's
like fair. I don't know. They called a kith the Thors if it was for the trolls.
Yeah, that's true because it is a proper name as well.
Yeah.
So yeah. I think it's also the first time we see an implication that Eshu as a figure is the founder of a kith. I mean, there was a lot of almost Vampire the Masquerade vibes in the sense of like bloodline and offshoots and individual progenitors. And that's not something we really saw elsewhere. Like we had kind of allegorical ones, like in this one where it says Slua said, but I don't think it's implying this is the first Slua who begat all the others.
Although this is definitely the whole... I think you can't read Changeling without unreliable narrator, and I think in here it's a embellishing narrator for the whole book, even if it's not the same voice.
Yeah.
So
anyway, it's a pretty awesome story within the story. Where they're having a Talecraft contest, and the Elegbara, I guess, is not really contributing, and she's like, "Oh, I bet you don't have a better story." So they're like, "Hold my wine," and then tell this story about Ojo and Iku, who are sort of Seelie and Unseelie analogs, squabbling over a maiden, and their dispute is keeping the earth from turning, so people are upset, and the Eshu arbitrates by stealing her away along with their treasures. And it kind of turns into a parable about Seelie versus Unseelie from the way that I read it. It establishes that mysterious trickster trope without being too, I would say, exoticizing about it. But I'm also...
No.
I grew up reading the Richard Burton translation of the 1001 Nights, which is one of the most over-the-top, florid Orientalist texts that's out there. So that's what I compare it to. That's my bar.
I mean, it is florid.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's a problem for this kith.
Yeah.
Like that.
It's not gross florid.
No. And I guess we go to chapter 1.
Yes. Melissa Iran's art is so disserviced by black and white.
Yeah.
I feel so bad.
So this is more like there's different storytellers for this book, but most of it's like in character. Another history of the Eshu, or history of the kith, but this one's very, very anti-she. Like actually most of the books, now I think about it.
Yeah.
And they address the whole name issue pretty early on, going like, well, like we're the children of Eshu, and people just started calling us Eshu, and it's like sort of like talking about name stealing, and the Elegbara got in trouble with it. Although Elegbara is still like a generic term, it even says that here, so it's like an overly generic for. They could have translated that as Kithain. So I looked it up, and it's messengers, or like probably somebody's equated it to angels. I don't know enough about it to see if that equation makes any sort of sense.
Well, angel just means messenger, so there you go.
Exactly, yeah.
I do like how they specify that Eshu was the linguist of Olorun, so I'm into that.
Yeah, they do get in the so-and-so begot so-and-so, and you're saying it's kind of vampire-like, but I think it's also just mythology-like. Like a lot of mythologies do that.
Yeah. And I will be the first to admit that I don't know enough about this particular mythology to know how accurate it is. I assume, I know when we talked with Pete before, he had said he really did as thorough research as he could at the time. And also considering that he was like 20, I'm going to give him something of a pass with.
Well, I personally think accuracy is important for Changeling. There's respectfulness, but then when you get to folklore and mythology, it's not like, unless it is one of the few belief systems where you have a canonical set of texts, you're going to get different stories. And another thing, Changeling is kind of playing with that anyway, like deliberately. So
yeah,
as long as you don't get ridiculous and, I don't know, make Slew a Russian, I think it's.
Well, like I said, I don't know enough to know whether or not. I don't trust myself to know how problematic it actually is.
But at least it doesn't leap out as problematic as much as some other things we've seen. So.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
It's no Kithbook knockers.
Yeah. In any case, we get a brief history where Eshu, the messenger, trickster, etc., had many children in his travels who became the Kith. I do like the description of him punishing them for appropriating his name and identity by blessing them to be wanderers and lore collectors, so that they would basically do his job for him.
Yep.
And then she invented racism, kind of.
Yeah.
That didn't help their reputation among the Kithain.
Yep. One thing I had a bit of a structural, I have no idea how I would have avoided it, is because the lexicon's at the back of the chapter, and like as you're going through this, it's just like, what are you saying now? Like you're trying to get from context, and and that's just going to happen in general when you have a lot of new terminology. So I don't know if there's definitely been a better way to doing it, but it wasn't just a little bit of a.
I mean, making an introduction, but that wouldn't really be in keeping with the format, I would say.
Yep.
So then we get some information about how the Kith kind of failed to recognize the sundering taking place. And then the shattering is set to take place over decades or centuries, which is at odds with some of the other depictions we've seen.
Like if you're talking about, like they made it seem like Europe had a very fast shattering.
Yeah.
But the issue definitely spanned way more than Europe. So.
Yeah. There is also a note that as Orishas, which, again, not sure how I feel about using that term, but okay, they were already demigods in a way, which I feel like we can apply to other mythic Kith forebear descendants of the Tuatha. Like, I mean, the Satyrs kind of had a bit of that in their Kithbook as well. So adapting to the Changeling way was easier for them. Makes sense.
And we do have an example of a Changeling who must have been there for thousands of years to get later in this book. So
yeah. I'm unclear exactly when and how, though, the Oba separated as their like noble offshoot. Or are they meant to be the original ones, and what are now called the Eshu are like the...
Well, I don't think the origin story really talks about it. That's the thing.
No.
But it's an origin story. I think that's the important thing about this whole book. It's stories. It's not literal 100% factual text.
Yeah. It does seem like the kind of thing that would be in there.
Yeah. Like, where'd the Obas come from? I want an origin story for that. It's probably going to be another one. There'd be like another one. You're like, oh.
Yeah.
Okay. That's not consistent with this other one. Sure.
There's notes that they really enjoyed the age of exploration. There were ships crewed by Fae that, it says, sailed the Dreaming. I guess they found some sea trods or something to get into the Dreaming.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing, too, I've noticed from our books that we're going through. It's unclear how closed off things were in the interregnum.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think it was completely shut off to the Dreaming.
Certainly Arcadia was shut, but maybe not the Dreaming.
Oh, yeah.
But I like that notion of the sea trot in particular. I've said before, I would love to do a historical Age of Piracy kind of setting. And that notion of, you're sailing into the unknown and you slip through and suddenly you're on a mythical island that doesn't exist anywhere but in the Dreaming. Like, that's a very old trope. So fits for them.
Yeah. They addressed the slave trade in a way I thought was okay
Yeah, I think it was
They
unavoidable.
couldn't ignore it. Yeah.
The way that the narrator kind of frames it as like, of course we wanted to stop this, but there were too few of us and too many greedy humans for us to stop it entirely.
Yeah.
So
he's like even saying like, no, definitely none of us did. I'm like, yeah, you keep saying that.
it reminded me, I didn't finish watching the TV adaptation of American Gods, but early on there's an episode where Anansi shows up on a slave ship and incites a rebellion. And I'm like, that's a really good Eshu inspiration for that kind of thing.
Oh, that portrayal of Anansi works really well for Eshu, actually.
It is a little weird, though, that part of history was kind of specified, but then the whole kind of colonization of the Americas was not. I mean, they kind of say, here's our relationship with the Nunyihi, and here's...
I mean, they get a bit into it, but I don't think that this Kith would not have been setting up settlements, right?
No.
They could have been part of the earlier traders and like explorers and trappers kind of.
And I mean, it's not something that I would expect a Kithbook to address in in an elaborate and nuanced way that does justice to everything. So yeah, it's. I dug the note about how Unsili Eshu would pair up with knockers for like wild transportation and the glamour of technology. Speed records.
And then a little bit of the 20th century, but it's kind of like, yeah, whatever.
Every Kith seems to have someone who claims they saw the resurgence coming. So, no exception here.
I don't think they say they saw it coming. They saw the resurgence happen before they saw the She, is more what I think the story is saying. Because it did take a little bit for the She to show up, so, or at least to be noticeable. And they all saw the flood of glamour when the moon landing happened, so.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I mean, they certainly say that they understood what the She coming back would mean for their culture and for Kithain in general.
Yep.
I like that there's Philadelphia and New Jersey representation scattered throughout this book as well. Represent!
Yeah, and the Accordance War, they're like, there were a handful of them that sided with the She, but for the vast majority, they were on the commoner side.
Serving in lots of different roles.
Yep.
Which is good.
Which I think is also consistent with what we saw in like
yeah.
And stuff.
They make good assassins, they make good scouts.
Yeah. Yeah. And then this author, like the in-character author at least, is like, maybe we were too slow to go in with High King David. So
there's the mention of what is it, the Kingdom of Ife, and I was trying to remember if that was mentioned at all in C20. I don't think it is, but the way it's presented is almost like one High King looking out for another in relation to David's disappearance, and I like that. I mean, it is the case also, though, that I wish second edition hadn't quite spent so much time continually tilting into the meta plot, but
yeah, and it was like the slow burn. Anyway,
I would have happily traded that bit for like more about Eshu life since the Accordance War, because by this point it had been 30 years.
Yep.
So there must have been some stuff.
And then we get the really long lexicon, which you really need. But
yeah,
I started by the end of the book. I love this reread. I caught up.
I should point out that Yorùbá is a tonal language, so properly many of these should have accent marks, but it's okay.
Well, not all of these are Yorùbá words, actually, in the lexicon.
That is true. There's a couple choices in here, like the fact that there's Romany mixed in. I was like, all right, I guess we're going in that direction.
And there's one of them that's from Werewolf. I don't know where that came from, but I doubt it's Yorùbá.
Oh, which one?
Well, the Bete, B-E-T-E.
Oh, Bete, yeah. Yeah, I always thought that was just supposed to be bête, like beast from French.
Yeah.
But maybe not.
Yeah, and some of these others I don't know. I haven't looked up everything.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because the term really doesn't get used in a way that's really appropriate in Canada. The whole tribe thing just felt weird. Putting that instead of Kith.
Yeah, that was...
I probably would have... I don't know if that's an age thing and country thing, but I would have liked that to have a different word that they used instead of Kith.
Yeah.
That word.
But that's chapter 1. Overall, I'd say pretty solid.
Yeah.
Even though this is an art house book, I do think it makes better use of this space, and it is a longer Kithbook than the older ones, so it's 96 pages, most of which are dense with text. Yep. Certainly more than Redcaps had.
Yeah. I mean, there's still gaps where they didn't need to be necessarily, but...
Yeah.
So...
Chapter 2.
This is about their culture. I mean, this is sort of going about where they are all over the different cultures that they're in. Their labeling of continents is a little bit strange, but
yeah.
And there's one thing, like, if I was running this game before the C20's Player's Guide, right?
Yeah.
They make it seem like they are the only Fae
Yes.
in all of Africa, the Middle East, and India. And
yeah, it's
and that's
on the one hand, because it's a complicated needle to thread, right? Where they want to acknowledge the other parts of the world that have been hitherto unanalyzed, and yet at the same time it is doing very little to counter the stereotype of the issue as the non-white Kith.
Yeah. My preference would have been just scattering of names of other Fae with no other info about them, because it's not their book.
Well, and it reminds me of like in Denizens of the Dreaming, when we were introduced to the various families of Darkkin, where it was kind of like, oh, it's the Fua, but they're also the Glashtig, the Leshi. Like, you know, it dropped a bunch of other names. And if this book said it's like the trickster wanderer archetype from each place, then I think I'd be more okay with it. But it's too vague to be able to really grok that from the text.
Yep. But to get into what they're actually doing, so they talk about there's ones who are in Africa, in the Middle East, and the diaspora of everywhere mentioned here. Lesser number of them in India, some Romani, and then before the 20th century, there were some, or maybe 21st. No, I think the century must have been 20th century still. The only issue in Europe, like who would have been born in Europe, would have been like in Spain, which was. There's a lot of stuff about bloodlines here that made me a bit uncomfortable.
It's vampire-ish in a way that I was.
Yeah, but at least with vampires, you're talking about vampires,
right?
And not people.
Not ethnic bloodlines. Yeah.
Yeah. At one point, they talk about Asia, and it's like, well, you were just talking about Asia when you mentioned the Middle East and India.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that I think could have been a better focus, maybe. So they kind of say each place has certain roles or attitudes that are more typical of issue from those places. And I think that they could have leaned into it by saying the issue from this place favor this kind of thing. I think that would have gotten away from the implication of all of the Fae on this continent are issue of this particular variety. So they say like the ones raised in Africa tend to be much more involved in storytelling. The ones from India tend to be riddlers and mystics. The ones who are based in other parts of Asia tend to be performers or poets or wandering monks. So having those kinds of common occupations within the Kith, that I think is something which we could hold on to that.
Yeah. And I think I also would have framed it as like, well, in this area, the Eshu have been here for a very long time, or the Hillerup or whatever. And in this area, they're recent to it or something, or there'd only been a handful of them beforehand.
Yeah, because I'm fine with the idea of them being everywhere, just not they're the only ones in all these other places. And I think that's not spelled out entirely here.
Yeah, but there's just the way they keep insisting like it's about genetics or something. That's where it got icky for me.
It could have also very easily worked as like a travelogue.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen that elsewhere. And, you know, I'd love to see Ibn Battuta through an Eshu lens. That would be really cool.
Yeah, and they do say that Eshu makes choose some of like any ethnicity, including white people. But
which is going to come up later. So anyway, then we have the birthrights and frailty bit. And I think we get more here about the culture surrounding birthrights and frailty than in any other Kithbook.
Yep. Maybe not Knocker, but
maybe.
Or Red Caps.
Maybe.
But... Actually, they're all about birthrights and frailty. But yeah, so it talks about spirit pathways, which... Did that change the name of that in C20?
I believe it's serendipity in C20.
Okay.
It emphasizes being at the right place is not the same as the happiest or easiest.
Yep.
And Eshu must accept how this gift moves them around. But from that grew probably their greatest value in life outlook, which is uhuru, which is a culturally loaded term, but I think it works here. I mean, that idea of freedom in a very essential way. And I like that the book notes that it holds them back from taking too many oaths. I'm like, take that, trolls.
Yep. Well, they get into that later too.
Yes.
And get into their hospitality is important to them. Telling stories is.
It's weird to hear about the formal guest rights stuff from the narrator, who presumably is Marie Laveau, Shadow Court Eshu extraordinaire.
Yeah.
So
she's probably still a good host.
Yeah. There's some nice bits on the power of storytelling as well under the Talecraft bit.
There's a big whole, is it even a sidebar if it's a whole page on...
Side page.
Yeah.
Page bar.
On their Spirit Pathways Birthright.
Yes.
Which I've never had trouble with this. I find it... And like on the Discord, there was people like going, "How have so much trouble?" Like their frailty, which they get into later, I have had trouble with for Eshu. But like,
which we also get a page bar for.
Yes, but their birthright of they have interesting stories that happen with them, like, and they will be able to get there eventually. Which, at least when I'm running, you might have the story will have this happen. The storyteller might have decided that, which I'm not the hugest fan of, but I get that. But you're not going to have like, that's not like the player characters picked all their destinations or what will happen.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think in most role-playing games, even in Changeling, you're not like, I'm going to go find the thing and I will eventually be able to get there is not a part of the play contract normally. But it is with an issue that you would be able to get there. It won't be easy necessarily. It could take a while.
Yeah.
You might not survive it, but you won't just be sitting there going, well, I don't know what to do now.
To me, it's never seemed any harder to integrate than like upper-level soothsay, where you kind of articulate the kind of fate you expect to come to pass. And in the page bar for Spirit Pathways, they emphasize perfect timing and stated quest as ways to allow the player to help you, the storyteller, get the story to where it needs to go. It's a nice kind of crossover between the storyteller's role and the player's role, and that co-construction of the game. But yeah, I never really found it difficult. I don't think players really... You have a lot of freedom as a storyteller to prevent players from abusing that.
Yeah, to me, it's like in a limited sense, the player can state, I would like to have this story happen.
Yeah, yeah.
In like super short, brief elevator pitch of what they want to have happen is like the goal. And there will be a story to do that now if the character pursues it, which is useful. It's a birthright. It's not like it's nothing at all, right? That can be pretty significant, but it's not like overpowered in my mind either. So
yeah. It would have been interesting to me if they had a little bit about like the piece where you gain an extra experience point from, a particularly interesting story being fulfilled. Because I would like to see more about stories as lessons and learning experiences as part of the Eshu ethos.
Yeah, that was the other thing, like figuring out what count. That would have been nice because what counts as that story and what doesn't.
That would have been helpful. The challenge piece of the recklessness sidebar I thought was good, where they're like, they don't have to accept a challenge that would force them to violate an oath, nor if they're in like life or death situation, or if they would look undignified.
Yeah, it's still pretty severe. Like, but I think it gives you the good. It's like, I'm going to challenge you to a thing that's a legit challenge. You got to take it.
Again, prevents players from abusing it to have that spelled out.
We talked about the orishas, which, I mean, okay, you can talk about the terminology and real world things, but the way this is all presented, it's like, are these the Tuatha De Danann with different names? Are these similar beings to the Tuatha De Danann? Are they very different? Are they... I kind of like that it's vague, but...
Yeah. I mean, going back to what I said before about applying that idea of the demigods to like the initial forebears of each kith, I think it's that same sort of muddy boundary. Your mileage may vary for whether or not you want to incorporate orishas into a Changeling game, but that's how the Kithbook does it. And it does specify, we see the other kiths as being associated with them. So like there's that distance, which I think is good to maintain.
Yeah, my personal take would be I'd have to learn more about it to decide if it's offensive or not. But if it's a problem, it's because of how it's representing a real world culture.
/ religion, yeah.
Yeah, / religion, yeah. But if you change the names, like I think whatever the problem would be, I think if it had different names, it could work. If that makes sense. Like the structure behind it, I like.
All I know is that a friend of mine who is a practitioner involved with these figures raised both eyebrows when I mentioned. And I mean, didn't get angry and say this is very wrong and etc., but was very much like, really?
And I know enough about this. I don't even say religion because it's going to be too broad, but like these names are used in a bunch of different religions.
Yeah.
So besides just the fact every individual has different opinions on things within a religion, you're going to have very different religions using these figures. So from different parts of the world.
Yeah. But again, I mean, considering the landscape of the game at the time and what the author had to work with, I think this was a step in the right direction for sure.
Yeah, that could be a whole We should do a cross episode, either us or cross with Mage, being like, how do you do this real world culture stuff in a role playing game with magic? And
well, as Pete himself pointed out, like I think he said something to the effect of, if I were the developer, I wouldn't have hired me to write this. But that was the state of things at the end of the art house era. It was whoever's available to bang out these words, like, and so doing due diligence was probably the best thing possible.
Yeah. But there's also, like, what do you do at your table?
Yeah,
like,
of course.
If you're trying to represent the world, you can't be of every culture.
Yeah.
So there has to be some sort of answer on what you're supposed to do here. So.
Yeah.
But that's a future episode idea.
Yes.
I don't even know how to do that one. But anyway, let's talk about their social structure.
Yep. Look out for number 1. And then others.
Well, no, they're like very independent people who have a strong sense of family. But like, every few years you meet up, you're like, hey, it's my family. Okay, bye.
Yeah, scattered family. And very rarely motleys of their own kind.
Mm-hmm.
I like the note that they only maintain a few freeholds because they don't really like settling down. But the one in Barcelona sounds like a pretty cool setting for a story.
Mm-hmm. And if someone is having a freehold, they're probably a grump. So
there's some very insistent advice about when you travel in the dreaming, do not leave the silver path. And I'm thinking, aren't they the ones most likely to do that?
There have been takes, like if you read, this is a thing that actually been toned down in C20 to some degree.
Yeah.
But like, if you really go through, like when we did Dreams and Nightmares, like leaving the silver path seemed like a bad idea if you didn't.
I for sure think it is. I just think the Eshu are the ones most likely to roll their eyes at that particular piece of advice.
Yeah, well, I mean, their birthright doesn't really protect them from leaving the silver path. Well, I mean, it protects one bit. They'll get there if they survive.
Yeah.
But
I guess knockers and balloons might also be willing to go off path.
Well, even those tend to stay on the air trots.
Right? Yeah. There's a few other tidbits about fashion and blending in. The Eshu like to listen to stories or play games as much as being the center of attention at parties. And they break hearts regularly by skipping town. And they have a primal need to tell stories. So, yeah.
I like this chapter.
Yeah, it's solid. I mean, like I said, I'm not sure about the method of the opening section, the format of it, but it is a solid society, culture, lifestyle overview. It gives you enough expanded from the mechanics of the game and fills in enough uncertainties, I think, to be useful.
Okay, so we get to chapter 3.
Do you notice how the chapter opening art is slowly getting better and better as you go through? Like just more elaborate and better scans. And...
just feeling so... She did so much of the Exalted era.
Yeah.
I always feel like this era's like, this is the Exalted era of Changeling.
It's Exalted with pointy ears.
But the Fairfolk book, we'll get to that.
No. Anyway, we have Ojo and Iku, who are presented as really alternatives to Seelie and Unseelie. Vaguely aligned.
Yeah, with their own codes.
Yeah.
I like their codes.
I do too. I won't go so far as to say I wish every Kith had this, but I think we do get a little bit of this where like each Kith, the Seelie redcaps might have their own like additional couple codes and the Unseelie have their own. I think that's something I would have been fine with.
Yeah. I think I kind of wish the Satyrs had it because they're a bit more distant culturally than the other.
They need a code of Ananda from Mage.
Yeah.
So with
the Troll's code of Dagda.
Yeah. Wasn't there was like a Wayfarer's code somewhere, and it's not in this book, which is...
No, that's in Dreams and Nightmares.
Was it Dreams? Okay, yeah. So here we have the Ojo, who are the Seelie-ish ones.
The daytime ones.
The ones who are more orderly and follow destiny and everything. And they have Heed the Call of Fate, where one must accept the preordained challenges one faces, pass on what you have heard, because it is a duty to teach as well as remember the stories one collects, and seek justice for those unheard, protect and speak for those at the edges of society. So that's, pretty cool. But they like the Seelie code too.
Yeah.
Except that few dishonors are actually worth death. There is that.
Then there's a sheet where the right of dements, they're like, but the rest they're cool with.
Yeah. Especially when passing through an area. They're like, yeah, we're going to skip that.
Yeah. And then the Unseelie Iku.
Yes. The ones who left chance and accident and chaos.
Well, it's like, the first one's like, for the Ojo was Heed the Call of Fate. Theirs was, there is no destiny.
Yeah.
leave trouble in your wake, and vengeance is divine. Where that's the least unseelie one to me in a way. The vengeance is divine,
but they're not unseelie, so or that part of their code
the
is
most distant from unseelie to me is that.
Yeah, they are also super into the unseelie code.
Yeah,
the Shadow Court stuff as well. It seems to me like the Iku-affiliated Eshu are probably the ones who got the All Hail Discordia aspect into the mix in the first place, maybe along with the Puka.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Yeah. But there are some elements in the Shadow Court that's too much even for them, because they really don't like Thalain.
Yeah. Or at least this author. It's hard to tell. Or this in-character author. That's always like that. Like, what does this unseelie person think of the Shadow Court? Not what does all of the Eshu think of the Shadow Court.
And I believe this is, along with Marie Laveau, who's the previous narrator, I believe this is another one of the famous faces later on. The Trenton punk bar owner.
Mm-hmm.
I did also like the leave trouble in your wake explanation is kind of like the point of storytelling is to create change. So use what you learn to force growth through memorable lessons in a sense. So I don't know. I really like this part. I think this is well done.
Too. And then we get their Kithain stereotypes with alternate names, multiple alternate names sometimes for everybody.
Yeah. Again, the Orisha affiliations, they do point out in the text that like, yeah, okay, we don't use these all the time. It's like the, I think they say reverently versus casually is like using the affiliated Orisha name versus the common Kith name.
Yep.
Which kind of feels like talking around the question of appropriateness.
It's kind of interesting how they prodigalized the Cluricon and the Piskies.
Yes. Yeah. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, before C20, those were the like, are they Kithain, are they Galain Kiths? So that was.
And the Piskies at this point were not how they are in C20, but they were slowly moving towards it, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, they started out from not Puka and slowly becoming more not Eshu.
Yeah.
And they said the Gillidu are basically like European Obas.
They're presented so weird. I mean, I'm glad they're in here. I love me some Gillidu, but I was like, they sound like inanimate priest kings or something.
I think you should substitute that with the nymph gift that you were.
Oh, that
we didn't.
I've got notes for sure.
Yeah, it's like this seems to apply to that nymph gift that we did.
Yeah, this would be more like how I think of the nymphs. Yes, they like that Boggins stay at home so they don't have to, and they make good gullible audiences. And they like learning cursing from the knockers. So.
It's probably the most pro knocker.
Yeah,
another kid.
Well, that was when I did Book of Days. One of the events that I had in there was the Dakar Rally, from Paris to Dakar, or formerly, and having teams of Eshu and knockers build like muscle cars to go off road and everything. So I think they do have some interesting points of connection, or at least points of connection that make for a really good road story.
Yep.
Puka are great for short periods, except when they interrupt stories. They do not like red caps.
Really? I thought this was pretty pro red cap.
I guess Savage Pack of Bastards is, affectionate.
Yep. Satyrs are everyone's view on satyrs, including the satyrs. So that...
The quote is, "The only common Kithain worth half a damn out on the road." It's like, oh, all right.
Yeah, they don't get tired.
That's true. Yeah. And they can keep up.
I wish there was a bit more on the Selkies. It feels like they should interact more, some of them. But
yeah, it feels like completionism just to throw it in here.
The one kit that explicitly do not get an Orisha.
Nope.
They're not allowed one. They used to have one that gets stripped from them.
And only the Skaha are decent. Their take on the Slua I thought was interesting, where it's like they pity them because they're squoodly, and live in, I don't know, dank places, but they admire their dignity and their knowledge, their discretion.
The trolls, they're like, oh, why did you have to side with the she?
They just don't get us. Which makes the issue sad.
Yep.
Especially the Ojo ones.
And then we have the Galain, where I'm not sure, this doesn't seem to really reference an anime the secret way at all. It's just...
Yeah. Maybe it was referencing the Shining Host Player's Guide. But yeah, it's the anime are like, oh, they're shy but wise and deserve respect.
There's the Nunehis. What did you think of that one?
I was surprised that the Nunyehi apparently have taught some of them Spirit Link. But I mean,
they basically said some Eshu are Nunehi.
Yeah. Well, or that they've intermarried, and
Yeah.
I don't know. It seems like a back end excuse to say, oh, you can have Eshu who are indigenous.
Okay. I was seeing it more as if you're playing a Nunehige game, maybe somebody could play an Eshu.
Yeah, or vice versa. Like, yeah, but at least they get along.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike the Thaleen.
Yeah, these seem to hate their Thaleen equivalent more than any other Kith do.
Yeah,
like their own Thaleen equivalent. So,
yep, a big old nope.
even though their Thaleen are like kind of actually not that nasty compared to most of the Thaleen, but we'll get to them later.
The Yadin, by contrast, are a mixed bag.
Yeah.
They're fascinated by the Moray, and who isn't? But there is the note. So the Thaleen are stated to have returned in the Resurgence, and I was trying to remember if Tyroraums from like during the Interregnum were a thing before C20, but it felt like I think there must have been at least a few Thaleen around. The Aithu later are said to have arrived with the second Resurgence from Book of Lost Houses.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Adine are like, oh, now they've returned. But some of them have still been around for a while because you had the Moray and the Aunids and the Karamet. So
yeah.
there's.
Well, I mean, the Adhene, even in that book, as we covered, is confused as to what they have.
Yeah.
So the Sien, okay, we're accepting them as the changelings in that area. So
the whole India is our compromise thing. I'm just gonna move past that.
What's got no Hessian for India? Like there was nothing. Anyway,
there is, because in Time of Thin Blood, when the antediluvian Ravana fought the Kuei-Jin, it's said to be like the front lines, and there are Hessian like involved and present in the fight, so like they're at least in the area. But yeah,
culturally so not.
Yeah, I know. It's unclear and not really expanded much. So
in my headcanon or whatever, I'm just like Hessian are this other thing, and then let's have like actual changelings in the.
Yeah. Kithain are nice, but often more trouble than they're worth.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas regular mortals are for dazzling and little else.
Vampires, they're like, I don't like these.
Shape changers are just, they play too rough.
Yeah.
Silent striders are okay.
Yeah. Wizards, I love how like so much in Changeling is so consistent about how terrible mages are in a way that like mages are terrible in Mage the Ascension, but the way that Changeling presents mages is not the way that it's great.
Yeah. They're untrustworthy at best, and then goes downhill from there.
They stole the names and stuff.
I actually really love how name taker is like an insult in here along the lines of Oathbreaker. I love that.
We get ghosts, which is a pretty fair description of wraiths.
And mummies.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't get any information about mummies, but they're in here.
Mm-hmm. Hunters, where I don't think they're talking about Hunter the Reckoning. I think they're talking about mortal hunters.
Yeah.
And then there's others. It's like, doesn't even get into that.
But it says you want to make it to Philadelphia by morning, because of course you do. So yeah, overall, there's this running theme of like, show up, be respectful, leave when asked, and if any Kith makes these things easier, then they're cool. And I feel like that's the overall perspective, which makes sense. But yeah, this is probably also the most art housey of the chapters, because between the icons and the big art, there's a lot of space used up. And the font just like colliding with itself in the headers was painful to look at. Anyway,
I mean that's not just an art house thing. Like look at
that's true.
A lot of Changeling.
Yeah.
And then we get chapter 4.
Yes.
Starts with the first heading that makes me uncomfortable.
Only the first?
No, the first heading of this chapter makes me uncomfortable.
Yes. So yeah, we have the Oba here. I approve of having non-Shi nobles. I believe there are folks who have tried to come up with houses for the Oba. I like that they exist.
They make it sound there aren't enough Oba that you really have those though.
Well, and something that I've had to think about with doing nymphs is because they are really bound with their places, which the whole not outside the Middle East or Africa piece makes it more difficult to have them than like most other place bound.
That's I said before, like C20's player guide, like how the heck could you have used an Oba with this book? Because there's like, oh, you're an Oba. Sometimes there's some Eshu. That's it. That's it for thousands of miles around you.
It does specify in this one and not in C20, importantly, that they're not bound to a place at first, and when they're childlings and wilders, they're like hellraisers and stuff.
Yep.
But because of the seeming change, they couldn't do that in C20, I guess. So I actually had a game I was in where one of the players played an Oba. He was a really bratty diplomat's son. It was like, it worked really well.
Yeah, I played in the game. I never found out what happened, but it was like a Kith based on the Oba, but was Roman and hated the Shi so much. But it was like European Oba hating the Shi for being usurpers or something. I didn't quite understand. I was playing in a LARP, that had it. That wasn't my character, so I don't really know what was going on there, but it was interesting.
Bizarre.
But we have a little note here for the Oba write-up. Oba are considered a noble kith like the Shi. Even those without a title require the Fey realm of lofty noble to effect with cantrips. Well, there's that rule we've been wondering about for the Shi, if that was true or not this whole time.
Good.
Who thought it would be in Kithbook Eshu?
I feel like that must have come up somewhere, but yeah, it's good to have it spelled out here.
So we have their birthright spirit pathways when they're childling or wilder is just an issue. I mean, they're still always noble, but then they get the Shi birthright when they become a grump.
Yeah.
They continue to have tailcraft, and their frailties get switched from reckless, like the Eshu frailty, to being native soil. Okay.
But they are tied to the lands they love.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, they're fine. I'm glad they exist. And then the Yaithu.
Yeah, it talks about them being the title is Creatures of the Blackest Heart.
Dog, dog, dog.
And I'm like, you read these and you're like, these are nicer than red caps.
Yeah.
Like for Thalane, they're just they make the goblins seem like the worst possible monsters. Like they're just
I was not wild about them being like, oh, they're just all thieves. So,
also con men.
And con men. Well, yeah. But other than that, I mean, they fall into the vein of Thalane, who are basically the same as their parent Kith, but slightly ickier.
Yep.
So.
And they have the entrancement, and actually, I kind of like it.
The birthrights?
Yeah, the birthrights and frailty.
Which are basically the same as in C20, I think, if I went back and checked. Maybe the mechanics are a little bit different. But yeah, they like entrancing people with their voices and looking pitiful to win sympathy.
Yeah.
I like these less than the Oba.
Yeah. Like, I think mechanically they work, and I think if you tweak the wording, the concept, like I think there's a way to make this concept work, but
yeah, and I don't know, because they're Thalane. I didn't go back and like read the whole description in C20, but because the Thalane got such short shrift in that book, I imagine that doesn't improve on this at all. So that'll be something to pay attention to next season.
Yeah. And then we get notable NPCs.
Starting with the one that, of course, had to be in here. Good old Shahrazad. She's my favorite. I mean, out of all of these, she was always going to be my favorite. But again, like with Vampire, there's a tilt at this special bloodline thing with the reference to her 3 daughters. It makes a nice story hook, but it's like, so are they a different kind of issue? Like, what's the deal with those 3, you know?
Well, it also gets the impression maybe she never went through the Changeling way.
Yeah, I doubt she did, because she's from centuries ago.
I get Jack Eaton.
I 100% believe this is somebody's character.
Yeah.
But I guess he's fine as a punk bar bouncer.
He could have been an NPC in a chronicle.
Yeah.
But yeah. Marie Laveau.
This is where the name taker thing was. That's because Marie Laveau being a famous historical figure, it's like, oh, you're not really Marie.
Yep.
I'm wondering also, because there's the meta plot tie-in and the House Beaumain tie-in, if New Orleans was also like the setting for the game, and this was also an NPC. But she's taking over Shadow Court business there.
And then we have Dice.
Let's talk about Dice.
Dice became a changeling thousands of years ago. In fact, had multiple lives thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
And then became a... I can't pronounce it right.
Well, it's... So here the word is spelled Sichuan, as in the style of cuisine from southern China, or the province in southern China, as opposed to Kithain, which is the Irish.
Oh, that explains it. He's spicy Chinese food. Gotcha.
The Irish word for peace versus the province in China.
Yeah.
Anyway, he's eternal. I think it was probably just like a spell check error or something.
Yeah. But that's not just the character of Dice. I'm like, what is this?
Well, and I encourage listeners to listen to our previous episode on the Shining Host Player's Guide, where, Pete kind of talks about this a little bit. But it's another one of those difficult needles to thread where you're trying to break the Kith out of the stereotyping that's existed, but it's difficult to do that. And the whole changing faces and changing identities thing is one possibility, one way to do that. But I think even when this came out, I feel like I remember thinking, oh, a white Eshu, because it was already like so, the stereotype was already so strong that it was only ever going to be a commentary on that. You know what I mean?
But wait, does it actually say in here he's a white Eshu?
I mean, the the artwork and our external knowledge, our knowledge external to the text indicates that.
Yep.
Because this was Pete's character, so.
And such an ancient one too. That's the.
Yeah. I mean, the important part is he can look like whatever he wants to, but the takeaway is currently he's a white guy. And that whether or not that resolves the lingering issues of the representation, it certainly brings them to the foreground to do that.
Yeah.
So, all that being said, I can't really fault authors when they want to put their own characters in the books that they're writing.
Yep. So this was a player character? Or is this an NPC? Because this is,
I believe, a player character.
How much XP or bonus? Like, this is.
Well, although, if it was a LARP character in a game that he was running,
playing for 3 years. He's playing for 3 years. There we go.
Yeah. We also have an Oba at the end.
Yeah, I kind of like her.
I like that she wants to start a Fae United Nations.
Yep.
She's pretty cool.
She doesn't seem to inclined to invite the she, which is fine.
They have their own parliament. They don't need it.
I was like, oh, Changeling is getting to the Spirit Alliance from Mage.
Right. So overall, I mean, they're fine. I do think a wider range of perspectives from the Iku/Unseelie would have been interesting. Like, I feel like Sherazad's daughters, the way they're presented, are supposed to be Unseelie. But yeah, it's fine.
Okay, so we have Chapter 5, Orisha's Yet to Come.
Only 4 templates, which is surprising.
Okay, I am so confused because there's only one author of this book.
Yes.
But it feels like whoever wrote these templates didn't read the book.
Oh.
Did they? Like, but I mean, what I mean is they're talking about all this stuff about how the Eshu are and what they're about. And there's none of that in these templates. I do not like these templates. Like,
yeah,
I'm normally more pro template than you, but these ones
I suppose my interpretation is that the first and third are very specific takes on the performer archetype, and the second is a take on the storyteller archetype. It's just that, you know, because it's breaking out of the stereotypical Eshu mold. But yeah, I mean, point taken. Like, it did kind of scratch my head a little bit at the skater. It's like,
yep. If it was in a completely different Kithbook Eshu, it might have made more sense, but it felt weird in this one.
I liked the Wandering Capoeira teacher, maybe in part because I did capoeira for a bit in college, but that one seemed like it fit the best to me.
Okay, that one has, I think, the same problem. You've had problems in the past where you just have certain problem players. I had, for a period of time, so many players just, when I'm running any sort of World of Darkness game, they would want to play someone with capoeira as like some sort of crazy powerful martial art. I had so many players wanting that, and I'm like, no, what? And like, well, you should be able to do this and this, and it's like, this is. It was the like Dragon Breath round of the games I was running. So what I see,
I do think people underestimate it. I will say that. But yes, I mean,
but it was like Doris. Yeah, it's like, oh, I'm going to be such a badass with capoeira. I'm like, okay, it's fine to do that, but when you get too many of those people wanting that and then wanting to like, oh, I don't think the maneuvers are quite powerful enough. It's like, okay, no.
Yeah, that's fair. I still like this one. The Bloody Mary one, who is like an Accordance War veteran who's still out for blood, she has Fairy Eternity, and I liked the implication that Fairy Eternity kind of needs a reason. So it's like she stays young from her rage. And I like that kind of backstory justification for taking maybe any supernatural merit and flaw. Because Fairy Eternity, I think it's very easy to just say, oh, you just have it. But I like bringing this in as like, no, there's a reason for you having it.
Yep.
So that was cool. But yeah.
And now we get the appendix.
Is it an appendix or is it chapter 6? It feels like a chapter.
No, it's an appendix. It says.
All right.
But it's where they put all the backgrounds and stuff.
So much crunch. This is one of the denser crunch chapters in the Kithbooks with math.
Yeah, so we get treasure tattoos, which I'm like,
I love this.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if it's balanced well, or I haven't thought through all of the kind of like issues with having a skinned bound.
I don't think it's unbalanced.
Yeah. Well, it does raise some questions, because like if you carry your treasure on your skin, what if you get it modified? Can it be stolen? Can its power be stolen?
Well, I think the whole point is it can't be stolen, but you can't get rid of it. You can't put it down or give it to someone else either.
Yeah.
So like that's the trade-off. And I think mechanically I don't think it's unbalanced. But it says players and storytellers should remember to each tattoo counts against the number of treasures a character is exposed to purpose of entering Bedlam. Do we actually have numbers on that in the Bedlam warning sign?
Yes, and I can't remember what the cutoff is. I think it might be like if you have more treasures than your glamour or something.
Yeah.
Something like that.
I mean, I do like magical tattoos. I'm a sucker
for those. And this is absolutely something I think could be jailbreaked out of just this Kith, because I mean, this is something that's supposed to be Kith specific, but I would love to see red caps with treasure tattoos. So I'm flagging that for lore of the Kiths when we get to that.
And then we have royal lineage, which falls under how title works in C20, actually. It was very different here, but one thing about the contradicts, it says Oba that don't have any of the title or whatever background still count as lofty noble, and here it says all Oba have at least one of this background. So it's like, and then count as okay.
Yeah, so maybe the whole what level do you need to affect titleless nobles isn't fully resolved in this book.
Although wait, this only applies while you're in the homeland, you lofty noble. So then this would mean all Oba get it. But if someone else had this background who was just a regular issue, and then they go to like North America, they wouldn't be titled, but in like Africa, they would be.
One thing that does bother me about it is it raises the question of how the kind of hereditary aspect works, because that's not something you get necessarily with she titles.
Yeah.
And like the relation between land and title, like does an Oba pass on their holding? You know.
Well, what does hereditary mean? Like if they just kept it as you get it between lives. Cool.
But, well, I don't know that it's between lives though, because it's not clear from this.
Title is, I think. Not that it's completely clear.
But title is, but not. There's one sentence in here. Hang on.
And I'm just like, how did the she make this not apply in terms of dreaming? Like that's interesting metaphysical implications.
Yeah.
And then there's Arishabond. I don't know what you think about that.
Flavor wise, it makes sense to me, but it reopens that can of worms about deities in relation to the Fae that I personally would rather leave to one side.
It's also like there's this history of exoticizing certain groups of people.
Yes.
With their mysticness.
Yeah, and spirit patrons in World of Darkness games kind of constantly get subjected to that. So
if they made this just like a thing some changelings get, I'd be like, cool.
Yeah, in theory, any of this stuff could be that, but yeah.
Yeah, it's like red caps are only nobles in Scotland or something.
And then merits and flaws.
Yep, I felt this was too travel focused.
Well, Gift of Babel is obviously my favorite, even though I want to overhaul both it and the entire language system in World of Darkness.
Yes, but you'd want to have some sort of thing where they can be better at it.
Yeah. I liked the first two as well, the Wayfarer's Feet and Long-Winded, although the math kind of does my head.
I just wish that the Wayfarer's Feet would specify. I wasn't unclear if you have to go barefoot to get benefit from it, or if you could just whatever shoes you wear, no matter how crappy, would also count fine.
I think it's supposed to be like Boggin feet. I mean,
yeah. Okay. See, I thought it'd be like, oh yeah, you're just wearing crappy sneakers. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Lost Horizon, like I'm really not sure about the point value of these, where it's like, oh, for a 5-point flaw, you basically have the Oba frailty and you can't leave. Let's just pull an example. It says small state, New Jersey. And I'm thinking, I know plenty of people who have never left New Jersey and they seem fine.
Yeah. It's supposed to suck if you're an issue, but like, I would definitely not allow this in my Changeling lore.
Yeah. There's still plenty to see and do, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, compare that with like Dark Fate or a Gase or something like. And then this is the first time we see the Living Legend merit, although it's rather different than in C20. I felt like it was excessive to require 3 dots of remembrance for this merit. So
this was 2nd edition Changeling, which just loved requiring the remembrance background for everything.
Yeah. Which I would love more people to take it, but yeah.
Yeah. It's just like, you must, to get your cool martial arts, if you're a Skahawk, you have to have remembrance background. You want to use Dragon's Ire, you have to.
Yeah. And then Nemesis is 5 of the easiest freebie points you'll ever get. So, like, I get that it's supposed to be hunted plus enemy, but as a storyteller, I wouldn't really know what to do with that. Like, I don't want to have to keep bringing someone's Nemesis into the game just to justify that.
Okay. There's a thing Terry Robinson complained about from his podcast a few times, and I totally agree with it too, where these flaws that should actually cost freebie points because it just hey, you're now the special character that the ST has to like make the game about.
Yeah,
that should cost a lot. That's a 7-point merit, not a 5-point flaw.
Or if there were just some kind of balance to like make it work out. Yeah, I don't know. So yeah, I mean, the merits and flaws. I think Living Legend in C20 is one of my favorites. So I feel forgiving of the one here, but otherwise the Gift of Babel one is the only one I think I'd be inclined to really use.
Long distance running, it's like, in theory I like it, but it doesn't.
In practice, it's awful.
Then we have the treasures. So they get sandals that are very durable.
And dust.
The dust was kind of interesting, but it lets you learn about, like, you know where all the Chinese food restaurants are, but you don't know if any of them are any good. I'm like, what? Should at least give you Yelp powers. Like,
yeah. I made a treasure for the Nymph book that was a map, and I feel like, why isn't this just a map?
Because you want to put dust on your feet.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, yeah. I liked the Blessed Opa, even though it's basically just, you stick a cantrip in this staff, but I like that they have the same kind of cachet as like named legendary swords, where it's like, this staff is called Fire Serpent, Wind Dancer, and they become these heirlooms. So that was cool.
Then a flying freehold, which it says is more of a freehold than a treasure.
Teleporting freehold.
Yeah, this is like TARDIS without time travel.
Yeah. I know you've like looked into that concept before, so I don't know if you had thoughts on this one in particular, because it does have these additional powers as well to favor storytelling.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a unique treasure, so it can be whatever powers you want. And like, I never know what to do with. I don't want to just hand this with an NPC because then I don't like having Elminster problems. And if the PCs have this, okay, but it's not really presented as something the PCs would have. But it'd be like, if the PCs had this, and this is like now the Chronicles based around this, that could work. But
there's just so many story possibilities waiting to happen in this write up, though.
Yeah.
So I love it.
Exactly. But it's like exactly how to exploit them for most Chronicles is where I get.
Yeah.
And then we get a new art, Talecraft. What do you think of this art?
The last art we ever got in Changeling.
Oh my god.
Well, just very briefly, because it is rather different from the C20 version.
Yep.
Level 1 lets you read a crowd's aura/mood, but without any real mechanical benefits.
Yeah.
Level 2 creates sound and lighting effects to, again, benefit unspecified. Level 3 is basically the same as level 2 in the C20 version, where you can create pulses of emotion. Level 4 creates a shield that soaks damage out of the words of a story, which is interesting, but I don't know that really follows the arc of the art. And then level 5 is the same as Legerdemain with creating illusions.
That bugged me. If you make the cantrip literally just the mechanics are just like this other cantrip. Like, no. The cantrip is handled exactly the same as Vanished Shadows, with all costs and realms required. See Changeling the Dreaming. I'm like, no, I want a new cantrip, please.
That also happened. Wasn't one of like the slivers in an anime like that too? I feel like.
Well, that's a bit better because at least it's someone else's power.
Or maybe Dreamcraft 5. I don't know. I feel like the Legerdemain 5 power has been copied.
I remember Dreamcraft and Talecraft were both,
at
least in 2nd edition, I'm not a fan of.
This version feels very derivative of Chicanery and Legerdemain and now Summer. But I understand why this art could exist. I like the note that they refused to teach it to the She in retaliation for the She stealing the naming art. That's a cool little note.
I think a Talecraft art would be cool. I don't know how I would do it.
Not
but I
this
don't
one.
think this did a great job either. Yeah. I mean, I might do this, but then I'd be like, well, that didn't work well. But
Yeah.
I can't say I could do better, but I'm just saying I want better.
Part of it too, I think, is because C20, 20 years after this book, players and games in general, I think, are a lot more liberal about messing in a meta sense with the story. So in something like the Trinity games, you have dramatic editing where you as the player can make these little changes to what has just happened or what's about to happen. And we see that in Talecraft 5 to an extent, where you just kind of say, oh yeah, the next street is an alleyway where we can hide, and then it is. So I think I prefer that to this one, because this just feels like a catch-all of powers around standing in front of people telling a story.
Yeah, and it's like, this seems more useful for like if you want to like be a DJ.
Yes. And why wouldn't you? So overall, I mean, I think this chapter started really strong and then kind of was uneven.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of crunch for a Kithbook, even if your mileage may vary. It depends which elements you're likely to see in a game.
Yeah. And then we get the character sheets where I believe the changes they wrote Kithbook Eshu at the top.
Yes. And then the most depressing last page.
Yeah, that's they took that out of the PDF.
Yeah.
Which,
go figure.
Which for good reason. But yeah, the coming next, Book of Glamour.
That ad was made by an intern on a lunch break too. It's just like fonts.
I'm not sure they had interns.
Actually. Yeah, maybe not.
Somebody on a lunch break.
Rich Thomas on a lunch break, or whoever did the.
No, I think Rich Thomas might have done a better job with that on lunch break.
That's true.
Someone who doesn't do who didn't know how any of the software works.
Ron Thompson, who did layout and typesetting, according to the credits.
Yeah. So yeah, what are your overall thoughts?
I mean, it was the last book for so many years that it's hard to hate it. For me anyway. Yeah. And it also has the benefit of hindsight in comparison to the other Kithbooks. So I do think Kithbook Slua is tighter and probably my favorite for setting a solid tone, but this is definitely a close second to the other.
Yeah. I think I don't like it quite as much as you. It's definitely I would still pick it up kind of book and use. Just you got to look at it with modern eyes and do some editing and maybe talk to someone if you're going to hand it out to someone.
Yeah.
First,
but they were always going to be tough to write, quote, properly,
Oh yeah.
Especially with like the racial and ethnic issues surrounding them from the earliest days.
Yeah. No, I don't. So. If you're like, hey Josh, you're gonna write the new Kithbook issue for C20 or 5th edition or whatever, right? I'd be like, no.
Thank you, but no thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
But whatever you may feel about how 20 years ago the author leaned into the research around like the Yorùbá connections and the origins, the choices to do that, the choices around that make more sense to me than, for example, making the Slua Russian or leaning into Jewish stereotypes for the Knockers.
Yeah, it's definitely less problematic, I think, than Kithbook Knockers, I think.
Yeah. And aside from all of that, I do think the text is crisper, I guess is the word I want to use, compared with something like Trolls that's very long-winded. The material around culture and the crunch are better developed than like Satyrs or Puka. The space is better used than in Redcaps. So I mean, I think along a lot of the possible axes on which we can measure this, it does fine. It may not be the best in all of them, but it's solid, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't necessarily put all Kithbooks on my list of you should get it for use in your modern C20 games.
Yeah.
But I would put this on the list, but it would not be my first supplement to pick from before C20 to use in your C20 game.
Yeah. If I can just briefly throw out some inspirational reading for people who do want some more issue-themed stuff that might be helpful for thinking of the Kith, I'm going to put in a plug for the novels Who Fears Death by Nnedi Okorafor, Wild Seed by Octavia Butler, and Black Leopard Red Wolf by Marlon James, because all three of those, I think, get into the spirit of African-inflected mythology and are really, really solid, excellent fantasy novels. And Who Fears Death actually has an issue as the protagonist. So
I think if you want to really over-research the subject, there's a podcast called The History of Africana Philosophy.
Ooh.
that I've been listening to, and it's getting near the end of it. It's on the same feed beforehand was the history of Indian philosophy, which would have some implications for here. And they're about to do Chinese philosophy next.
See, I don't think that's overkill at all. I think that's the kind of thing which I wish I had gotten more exposure to sooner. So.
Yep. There are some episodes that would not help you with your Eshu character necessarily.
Oh, okay. That's fine.
Or maybe it might. Depends on your Eshu character. So
regardless, we can put links in the show notes.
Yes. So you want to do the listener questions?
We can. I think we've kind of covered.
Yeah, we did actually. Yeah. Have you encountered any less useful arts? I can't
Infusion.
remember. Infusion. But no, infusion is limited use.
Okay, Spirit Link.
But in that limited use, Spirit Link, there we go.
Yeah. Chig also asks, is serendipity useless, overpowered, or both?
Neither. I really like it. So read this book. It'll tell you. If you're having trouble with it, I think you'll get it.
Or at least read that page bar.
Yeah. It would not be useful if you converted Changeling to Gumshoe or some game like that.
There you go.
But for a Changeling game, I think it's...
Yeah. So then Luna Andromeda Bebe asks, how far do you personally allow the birthright of serendipity to go? It can certainly be very vague as to what it allows the issue to stumble upon, and right place at the right time can mean a whole host of things. Honestly, I would point to the Storyteller's Guide and say read that, because all it's really doing from a storyteller perspective, the advice that is already out there about striking the balance between railroading your players and letting them dominate the story. The issue birthright just kind of forces you to confront what you should be confronting anyway, I think. So allow it to go as far as your chronicle can accommodate. If you're doing a wild improvisational sandbox thing, that's much easier than everyone's on a single MacGuffin quest. So
yeah, I don't like single MacGuffin quests. That's
me neither. I use them, but I don't like them.
How yeesh is this book? I read it, but I'm not sensitive to this stuff as some folk like. Comparable to the Slur book from World of Darkness, not at all. Closer to, I don't know what Atlanta meant, but
Necropolis Atlanta from Wraith.
Okay. Again, we're not sure. The author's not sure.
Yeah.
But there was a genuine attempt.
Yeah.
I think. And I think if there are problems, which I would have to learn about from someone from those cultures to know what those problems are, I think it's still very recoverable.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I certainly think there are yeesher books out there, and there are books that have probably handled their own issues more sensitively with authors who were not directly involved in that culture.
If it was handed to me at that time or now, right? And you put a gun to my head. I had to write it for whatever reason. I don't know how to handle it better. Like, I could think, well, let's just completely revise what the issue are, but that might be that has other implications that are possibly icky.
Yeah.
And without doing that, you gotta face this stuff. So
I don't think you'd be able to overhaul them like that without overhauling all of the Kiths, which is not. Yeah. I won't say that's never going to happen, because we might get C5 and we'll see. But
I'm not even sure overhauling all the Kiths wouldn't actually be ickier, and how to do that without it being
worse.
No,
you would need to overhaul what a Kith is what I mean.
Yeah, but I think that also has other problems too, and
it could.
Yeah,
but I think if you're going to try and address some of these things, you have to start from the ground up and figure it out. You can't just correct them one at a time easily.
Yeah. Like if somebody says, hey, I want to play a Nigerian fae in Changeling the Lost or any other fairy game, you're still going to have these things to face. So
yeah. In any case, it stands at the end of my shelf of change. Well, no, not at the end, because the Kithbooks are numbered peculiarly. So
yeah. I just keep doing this podcast. I keep changing where things are on it. The shelf. So sometimes I put all the Kithbooks together, sometimes I split them up.
Excellent. So that's the book.
That wraps up the last full Changeling book for 2nd edition.
Oh, it's so weird.
Yeah, we're still going to do Time of Judgment.
Yes.
Or at least the chapter. We're not doing the whole non-Changeling bits.
And then maybe some other...
Oh yeah, and some other books and things. Dark Ages Fae, maybe Exalted the Fair Folk, maybe some other stuff.
But stay tuned in a couple of weeks for our State of the Podcast minisode, where we lay all that out.
Yep.
In the meantime...
Yeah, so yeah, you can find us at changelingthepodcast.com. working on our YouTube page. Now we'll have regular episodes. So if you prefer listening to us on YouTube or listening to us right now on YouTube, it's youtube.com/Changeling the podcast.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yep. You can follow us on Facebook for Changeling the podcast. You can please join us on our hopping Discord, discord.me/CTP. Definitely check out our Patreon. That would definitely help if you
Please.
Things are tight right now, but if you can help us, that would really help with hosting costs and things. We're getting more popular, and unfortunately that makes things cost a bit more. So that's patreon.com/Changeling the podcast. We're also on Mastodon at changelingpod@dice.camp.
I don't know how Mastodon works. I mean, I do, but
yeah,
yeah,
I know how it works, but there's different ways of naming it too. Yeah, and
email. Did we say email?
You can send us an email, podcast@changelingthepodcast.com.
All the links will be in the show notes.
Okay. And once again, I'm Josh.
I am that merry wanderer of the night known as Buka.
And remember, if you're an Eshu, you will get there.
Eventually. And wherever you go, there you are.
The treasures of the Eshu have inspired copycat acts of glamour from a wide variety of kiths with mixed results. Corbies of redcaps who have attempted to infuse their 90s barbed wire tattoos with badass cantrips have found their fey means and true names all slowly transforming into the same dude named Chad. Instead of sacred staffs, the Puka have developed an entire fighting art using uncooked pasta, bundling and becharming thousands of dry spaghetti into deadly truncheons that they name things like Codswalloper and the Italian Job. And while Shahrazad may have originated the concept of a teleporting freehold with storytelling powers, the satyr's ill-fated attempt to duplicate it for sexy times resulted in the catastrophic failure of all waterbeds within a 500-kilometer radius. While our own freehold doesn't exactly teleport, it's hosted online at Discord, which is kind of the next best thing in terms of accessibility. Won't you consider joining us at www.discord.me/CTP? You can also support our show by leaving a review on the podcast listening platform of your greatest convenience, and or signing up for our Patreon at www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast. Subscribers get benefits, including a shout-out at the end of each episode, as with the following fine folks: Derek, Dorchatus, Oreo, Raz Caboose, Sanchiger, Sija, Terry Robinson, and Tricerabeth. Thanks for listening, may the wind be always at your back, and until the silver path leads you to our doorstep again, keep on dreaming.